Welcome to Novara Live. I'm Michael Walker, and the weekend has come early because I'm joined by Aaron Bastani. Aaron, how are you doing?
I'm doing very well, Michael, but I've got bad news for you. You're also going to have to put up with me tomorrow night as well. So it's a 4-day weekend. We've almost gone to fully automated luxury communism.
I get to have that Friday feeling 2 nights in a row. How lucky am I? You know, I never thought I'd be in this position. Also coming up tonight, other than, you know, my joy, my glee, right-wingers are freaking out about Hunt spending £1 million on a war memorial for Muslims. A spokesperson for the Israeli Prime Minister has appeared on Sky arguing that Israel aren't doing a bad job at all in Gaza when it comes to getting food to civilians. And the government extremism program has been broadened to include socialism, anti-fascism, and communism. So hide your Novara media merch. It could be getting you in a lot of trouble soon. The Chancellor has today defended his plans announced in yesterday's budget. Here is Jeremy Hunt speaking to Amal Rajan on Radio 4.
I know you don't want it to be, and you'll say you don't want it to be, but this might be one of your last big acts in politics. Do you really think you've met the moment? This is a country ravaged by economic shocks, at best drifting, at worst stagnant. We all know about its potential, but we've had 7 quarters of falling GDP per head. That's been revised downwards. We're hooked on foreign labour. The birth rate is collapsing. Many public services are creaking. Councils are going bust. Those are facts. Has your budget really come even close to meeting the scale of the challenges this country faces?
I believe it has. And if you want gimmicks, if you want quick fixes that unravel, then I'm not your person. If you want a long-term plan to deliver better public services, to get more investment into the economy, then I have delivered packages that do that. And by the way, I think the overall characterization that you've just given of the British economy is unworthy of the BBC. Because we have grown faster.
You can criticize the BBC. The BBC is an organisation with tens of thousands of people who do lots of different things. There is no such thing as the BBC, and I'm putting to you facts about this country, which a lot of people feel.
It's unworthy of you, Amal.
Well, what have I said that's incorrect?
Well, will you let me answer the question? Can I answer it? We have grown faster than the 3 largest European economies since 2010. The IMF say that we are going to grow faster than those 3 large European economies in the next 5 years as well. We have created 800 more jobs, 800 more people in work every single day that we've been in office. We've built the biggest technology industry in Europe, double the size of Germany's. There is tremendous potential.
Somewhat strange to hear a BBC host say there is no such thing as the BBC. Like the Gulf War didn't happen. Baudrillard, I haven't read the book, but as ever I absorb some of these theories secondhand. That brag by Jeremy Hunt that we had grown faster than our 3 biggest neighbours was unimpressive for 2 reasons. First, you remember that for the first half of the 2010s, Europe was suffering from the Eurozone debt crisis, right? We weren't hit by that. But that was thanks to Gordon Brown's decision not to enter the euro, nothing to do with the Tories. So if you compare us to a bunch of countries who are in the middle of, you know, a really world historic crisis, that's not necessarily saying many positive things about our own economy. The more important thing, though, is this. UK growth only looks passable, doesn't look good on any account, but it looks passable if you look at it in gross terms. And that's because our population has grown at a fast rate due to migration. On a per person basis, which is what really matters, that's the money in your pocket, growth since 2010 has been dire. And that's set to continue. The Institute for Fiscal Studies show that on a per capita basis between 2007 and 2019, the economy grew by only 0.5% per year. And between 2019 and 2028, it's set to, again, only grow by 0.5% per year. Now, that compares to 2.5% annual growth between 1995 and 2007. And in terms of disposable income, the story is no better. In 2019 to 2020, real disposable income per person per household was £27,000. In 2025 to 2026, it's set to be £27,000. So the big story here, no change between 2019 and 2025. Rishi Sunak also spoke to the media today, and he tried to put on a brave face.
Everyone recognises the difficult times that we've been through as a country over the past couple of years. We've had the pandemic and the war in Ukraine, both of which necessitated the government stepping in rightly to support people, families, businesses through those difficult times. And that's, of course, had an impact on things. And I think people will recognise that. But the direction of travel is now crystal clear. Our plans are working because of the improvement in the economic environment, because of the fact we've been able to get inflation down from 11% to 4%, mortgage rates, energy bills falling, wages rising. We've been able to start cutting people's taxes responsibly. And the two tax cuts that have been announced at the end of last year and just now mean a tax cut worth around £900 for an average person in work earning 35k. Half of it kicked in January, the other half in a few weeks in April. And that shows that our plans are working. I believe in a society where hard work is rewarded. We're delivering that for people, and they can see that the change we're talking about is starting to happen. And if we stick to the plan, we can make sure that everyone has peace of mind, that there's a brighter future for them and their family, and we can all have a renewed sense of pride in the country.
Now, this chart from the Resolution Foundation shows why the idea of sticking with the Tories' plan won't be persuasive to many people. So what this chart shows you is how much average real household disposable income per person grew in various parliaments. So you can see at the top there, between 1955 and 1959, it grew by just over 10% over the course of the parliament. It was very high in 1987 to 1992, also quite high 1997 to 2001, about 13% over the course of the parliament. But then you can see at the bottom here, it's the first time since 1955, when this data begins, that incomes have fallen over the course of a parliament. So the average real household disposable income per person will have fallen, according to the Resolution Foundation, by 0.9% over the course of this parliament. Aaron, why would anyone look at a chart like that, or look at their pockets over the past 5 years and look at the Tories and say, aha, I like this plan, let's stick with it?
Well, Michael, the truth is very few people think that, hence they're polling around 20% in most opinion polls. And of course, there's lots of quote-unquote conventional wisdom out there which says, well, of course, they'll outperform those polls. I mean, maybe they'll underperform them. Who knows? I certainly don't think they have some divine right to get, 10% higher than they do, than they're presently getting in the opinion polls. In 1997, they got 31% of the vote. Right now, that would be an extraordinary result for the Conservative Party. So you've highlighted disposable income there. We could talk about some other stuff too, which, the Tories love to pride themselves on. Home ownership, much lower than it was at its peak 20 years ago. Particularly for people in their late 30s, early 40s, they are 3 times more likely to rent now than 20 years ago. Home ownership has collapsed amongst millennials, and of course, the same is going to apply to Gen Z, Gen Alpha. Rents have gone up and up and up. Increasingly as well, by the way, outside of major cities. It's places like Rochdale, Oldham are seeing massive rent rises. Something else that the Tories love to talk about, debt to GDP. Apparently we were in a fiscal crisis in 2010 when we had a debt to GDP ratio of 60%. Oh my God. Well, guess what, Michael? Now it's 98%. So whatever you want to pick as a Tory, debt to GDP, wages, productivity, growth, it's all bad, bad, bad. And I think people now are seeing through this nonsense, this game, this gaslighting that Jeremy Hunt tried on with Amal Rajam, which is, how dare you talk about this, or it's beneath the BBC. Shut up. You failed on all the stuff you claim to care about. I just need to go out onto a high street in most parts of the country, look at the closed shops, look at the litter on the streets, look at the general condition of things, look at the NHS, look at schools, look at all manner of public services, look at how much you're paying for council tax. Nobody says, you know what, I love this, my council tax, I don't pay too much. And that's, of course, because the central grant given by Westminster to local government has been cut by around 50% or 40 to 50% since 2010. And local government has had to make up that shortfall through things like business rates and council tax increases. Failure, failure, failure. We've got imminent debt crises across councils in this country, but also across places like higher education too. And people think, well, what the hell works? And this has all been on the watch of the Conservative Party since 2010, and they're going to have to take some responsibility.
So as you point out, the government, or the public, have not been convinced by this narrative. They don't want to stick with the Conservative plan, which means we are likely to have a Labour government before the year is out. So let's look at their alternative. Rachel Reeves did the media round this morning and faced questions about whether Labour's plan differed from the Tories at all.
So let's be specific. What would you have done differently?
So what we need is a plan for growth. We need to get people back to work. There are 700,000 more people due to be on sickness benefits. And that, of course, is a huge cost to the economy with the benefits paid out, but also the huge loss in terms of what they could be contributing. So we need to be getting people back to work. That means getting our NHS waiting lists down. It means more targeted support. It means reforming the apprenticeship levy so that businesses can get the workers with the skills that they need to give young people a chance to build a career and build their skills. We need to be investing alongside business in the jobs and the industries of the future in towns and cities around the UK.
I've heard apprenticeship levy, and I haven't heard what you would have done differently.
Apprenticeship levy, a national wealth fund to invest alongside.
National Wealth Fund,
National Wealth Fund to invest alongside businesses in the industries of the future. Planning reform so that we can get Britain building again. Those are the building blocks to grow our economy.
So an apprenticeship levy, investment by a National Wealth Fund, and planning reform. Is that enough to turn Britain's economy around? Well, one problem is that a wealth fund would need some money. And Labour's self-imposed fiscal rules, plus their opposition to new taxes, mean they'll struggle to find any. And this rather depressing chart from the IFS shows that under both Labour and the Tories, net public investment is set to fall, and you can see that to a considerable extent. And the combination of opposition to tax rises and strict self-imposed fiscal rules means the director of the IFS has accused both Labour and the Tories of a conspiracy of silence.
The opposition have been just as shy as the Chancellor about telling us what they actually intend to do on taxes and spending after the election. If I'm sceptical about Mr Hunt's ability to stick to his current spending plans, I'm at least that sceptical that Rachel Reeves will preside over deep cuts in public service spending. But this was not a budget which addressed the real challenges we're facing because it was not transparent about what those challenges are. Government and opposition are joining in a conspiracy of silence in not acknowledging the scale of the choices and trade-offs that will face us after the election. They and we could be in for a rude awakening when those choices become unavoidable.
The choices and trade-offs really here. So both Labour and the Conservatives have said their plans basically involve public spending going up by 1% a year, public spending on public services and the like. But because they have protected some sectors, so health, education, for example, which the IFS expect to rise by about 3%, that means that all the other unprotected areas could fall by 3%. So that would include, again, local government, right? So he's saying, basically, their plans imply austerity, but neither of them are standing up and saying, we're going to enforce austerity. So he's saying there's this conspiracy of silence. Both of their plans involve massive spending cuts, which neither of them will spell out, because presumably that's not a very helpful thing to do before an election. Aaron, what did you make of that sort of analysis from the IFS director? Both parties have a conspiracy of silence.
Well, he's right. I'm not the biggest fan of the IFS and Paul Johnson because I think they were effectively cheerleaders for austerity 1.0 after 2010. I think their whole view of fiscal policy, let's not get into the complications here, but I think it's erroneous. They don't view basically greater government spend as itself helping to create broader demand. They don't understand the idea of multipliers. They do understand it, they disagree with it. The idea of multipliers that come out of public investment, that's fine. Argue that for a minute. You can get on James Medway or Mariana Mazzucato to disagree with them. I think they've been discredited on that significantly. But on this conspiracy of silence, he's absolutely correct. Look, both parties here are accepting austerity. And we knew this a year ago. You know, I talked about this, I wrote about this in one of our media a year ago. Labour effectively seemed to be saying, we will do X, Y, Z, all these things, off the back of growth, economic growth. Okay. How are you going to grow the economy? Because what we've had in the last few years is this idea that, you know, we can't spend money until we grow the economy. Actually, we've probably got it the wrong way around. We need to spend some money to grow the economy. But anyway, you don't think you need to spend money to grow the economy. So how are you going to do that? Well, we'll be the grown-ups in the room. We'll calm the markets. You know, Keir Starmer has a nice haircut. Rachel Reeves used to work for the Bank of England. Okay, fine. And planning reform. There are these two things. the grown-ups in the room, okay, we're back, and we'll do some things which are going to piss off Lib Dem, Tory floating voters in the home counties. Okay, Labour, by the way, can afford to do that. The Tories can't. That's one thing in their favour. If you want land and planning reform, it's going to be easier for Labour to do than the Tories because they're less reliant on marginal constituencies that are generally in the green belt. So, okay, at least that's plausible. The Tories promised that, they didn't deliver. But that's not going to generate the kind of growth you're going to need to address the problems we've mentioned. Labour also love to talk about Jeremy Corbyn's gone. We're now the party of rearmament. I mean, my goodness, Michael, there is such profound dissonance between what they're saying on things like public health care, on elderly care, on military, etc. And of course, they're now ditched climate change fund of 28 billion a year. They were never going to do that. But again, let's park that for a moment. There is such profound dissonance between all of these commitments and where the money's going to come from. It's not going to come from growth and the fact that the market's like Keir Starmer's haircut. That is more nonsensical, by the way, than the Liz Truss position, which got her booted after 44 days in office. This is more nonsensical. This is more absurd. Right now, we're not hearing that from the media because they've basically decided that it's Labour's turn. That's not good enough.
In terms of the absurdity, so I mean, on the whole, I agree with you. But someone did put it to me the other day that it might be the case that business feels such goodwill towards the Labour Party because it has sort of dropped any of the left-wing populist stuff. It's pretty much saying we want to make Britain as business-friendly as possible, and presumably the Conservative Party are going to go a bit wacky over the next 5 years. So it might be the case that business actually wants to reward Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves and sort of decide to investment which it might have held back for a while because of sort of political instability. Say, okay, now is the time where it does seem like we're going to have some stability in the economy. Investment which they've held back, they are now going to put into the British economy. It won't radically transform people's livelihoods, but it might, get growth up by 0.1, 0.2, 0.3%, and that could create a little bit of extra money. I mean, do you think that's completely ridiculous?
I do think it's ridiculous, yeah. I mean, what are the obstacles to growth right now? You could say that our position outside of the European Union, we're not in the single market. That's one. Labour aren't going to do anything on that. And you can say that's good politics or whatever, but it's a major factor. We have, right now we're in a recession, per capita recession. We've been in that for a very long time. And that's huge, it's unprecedented. And I think just the idea that, we'll reward Labour. Business doesn't work like that. Business invests money to make money, right? That's a very obvious point, but it really should be stressed. Business will invest in the UK if it makes them money, not because they want to do a favour for Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves. So yeah, look, you might get one or two, really prestigious investments that you wouldn't have got before, although there have been those as well, right? Investments in the UK by major tech companies or whatever since Brexit. But it's not going to make a huge difference. This is an economy, Michael, of 68 million people. 68 million people. We've got a crisis of funding in regards to our great cities and our higher education sector. Just two examples. Look at Birmingham. 600 layoffs. They're going to have to sell £1 billion worth of assets. They're going to have to make cuts of 300 million to things like adult social care, all kinds of other services too. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. So, okay, well, if Nissan and Alphabet make some high-profile investments in the UK because of Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves, great. It might make 0.01% difference. I don't think even 0.1. I think, Michael, is quite adventurous. So look, the macro stuff on the UK economy is not good, right? We have expensive energy, and we have high rents. And realistically, if you want to find high returns, you're not going to find them in the UK, particularly because of energy. And that's a problem across Europe, right? Germany has that problem more than anywhere else. It's deindustrializing because to make stuff in Germany is now even more expensive than it was in Vietnam or China because those energy costs are so high. That matters more than Keir Starmer's haircut. But sadly, because of the trivial nature of our political discussion in this country, that's not what we're talking about. What's Labour going to do about energy? If you want to reindustrialize, if you want to have export-oriented growth, you're going to need to start with the basics, cheap energy. Where are you going to get it from? Okay, nuclear. Well, that's not going to come online for 10, 15 years. 10 years is ultra ambitious. So in the short term, what are you doing? We're not having a conversation around industrial policy because it's coded as left wing. Talk about industrial policy. My God, are you Jeremy Corbyn? Are you John McDonnell? Don't do that. So, I think half the problem as well, Michael, you say business. What is business? They don't mean the small and medium-sized enterprises, which comprise actually most business in this country. They mean a few companies on the FTSE 250 that's, their CEO might go on Question Time once every 2 years, and the supermarkets, and some consultants on LinkedIn. That's business for these people. By the way, it's not business. The businesses that employ most people and generate the most taxes in this country are broadly invisible. They're the ones being left to rot on the high street with zero political representation, because believe me, the thing they've asked for the most in the last year, 18 months, is a VAT tax cut. Nobody in mainstream politics in this country, nobody has even proposed that, unlike somewhere like Germany, where, of course, you have small businesses at the center of their sort of political debate rather than older homeowners who, let's be honest, call the shots in this country when it comes to the political quote-unquote center ground.
Do they have lower VAT in Germany? I mean, I suppose also, one might say to you, if you want a VAT tax cut, because, I think you should borrow to invest, but you can't really borrow for a VAT tax cut. So you would have to tax something. I suppose you could tax wealth and cut VAT. What would you do?
Well, we've just had this next cut, this national insurance contributions cut. We had 2% that came in January, 2% again. It's gone from 12 to 8. It's going to cost about 20 billion. I think, you could have cut VAT for a year. I mean, we've gone past that now, right? We had an extraordinarily hard year. I would have done it then. So many businesses, Michael, have folded because they were just 5-10% over. They couldn't make ends meet, and actually bringing VAT down by 10% for a year would have made a huge difference, and probably would have been a net contributor to the exchequer, because you'd still have those businesses paying more taxes in the long term. I think we need to increase capital gains, and I think we should reduce VAT, but that's a different conversation.
We said yesterday that the Tories borrowing Labour's tax policies posed a problem for Labour. Labour had said they'd fund a bunch of policies, essentially by abolishing non-dom status and extending windfall taxes. Anytime they had this idea, we'll pay for it with this non-dom tax. Well, that's no longer available because Jeremy Hunt's gone and done it before them. So where would they find the extra money? This is from the BBC. Labour had planned to raise an extra £2 billion compared to the government by replacing non-dom rules for UK residents based overseas for tax purposes. It had earmarked £365 million from this to fund free school breakfast clubs for all primary school pupils in England if it wins the next general election. It had also set aside £1.5 billion to pay for extra appointments in NHS hospitals, £171 million for new CT scanners, and £111 million for extra dentist appointments. However, the Chancellor has now stolen the policy to partially fund a further 2p in the pound to cut national insurance and payroll tax, which Labour says it supports. Following the budget on Wednesday, Ms Reeves ruled out a new tax on wealth to make up the shortfall it has created in the party's spending plans. Now, she has signalled that Labour plans to fund their proposals through savings to future government spending. And this is efficiency savings again. So we'll find the money. And these are tiny sums, by the way. The idea that you're sort of getting into government and your big policies are £365 million for breakfast clubs. Free school breakfast clubs, great, fabulous. But these are sort of really tiny at the margins policies. £1.5 billion for the NHS, £171 million for new CT scanners. This is small fry. But even this small fry now, they're going to have to find the money from somewhere else. I want to go on to something that was somewhat surprising about the Tories' budget, or some analysis which perhaps confounds expectations. So it's from the Resolution Foundation, and it shows how tax changes in this Parliament will affect different groups in society. Now, as you can see, employees, so people who work, will be 50, or people who have a salary, will be £50 a year better off. So hardly something to write home about. If you're a full-time employee, you'll on average be £100 better off because of the tax changes in this Parliament. Part-time and self-employed people are £200 worse off because of tax changes. But it's pensioners who have really been clobbered. So they are on average £600 a year worse off over the course of this Parliament. Annually. Due to tax changes which were made over the course of this Parliament. So, Aaron, we often think of sort of older people as having a stranglehold over British politics, but the Conservative Party, the party of old people, has made a cumulative set of tax changes which has left the average pensioner £600 worse off a year. Surprising, no?
Yeah, it's probably not the smartest politics, is it? Their vote, bear in mind, Labour in the 2019 general election won more voters than the Tories amongst under 65s, marginally. The point is, amongst over 65s, rather, it was a landslide for the Tories. And they've obviously had things like the triple lock on pensions, which has really made that a cast iron vote for them. But yeah, yesterday was a very good budget for people who were in work and earning between 26 and 60K. Very good. It was a net positive budget, even if the tax thresholds stay where they are, this sleight of hand that everybody's talking about. If you're earning between 26 and 60K, you're up. If you're earning more than 60K, you're down. And if you're earning less than 26, you're also slightly down. But you're particularly down if you're a pensioner. So surprising. And as well, also the big change which I liked yesterday was moving the threshold on child benefit, because it's unfair towards single parents. But again, most sort of what people in their early 40s with a kid, they're probably not voting Tory at this point. So the clever political move would be to help pensioners more, not less. But maybe they thought we've helped pensioners enough since 2010, which of all the major demographics out there, they've helped them certainly more than the young or middle-aged people who are middle-income earners. But yeah, it is a surprise politically because, look, those are some of the last people looking to vote Tory. And if they're not being helped, they're probably going to start asking themselves, why bother?
In case you're wondering, obviously the Tories haven't announced some old people tax. So the reason it is that older people have been hit harder is because the Tories have, in effect, increased income tax. They haven't changed the rates, but because they've kept the thresholds stable, more people are going into the higher rates of tax. And income tax also applies to pensioners. But the government have sort of, I suppose, let's say, given people a consolation, which is cutting national insurance. So if you're a working age person, they basically level out. So your income tax would have gone up a bit if you've got brought into a higher threshold, but your national insurance payments would have gone down because the rate has gone down. But only working age people pay national insurance. So for working age people, it basically balances out. You're slightly better off due to the tax changes. You're worse off because of the terrible economy, but because of the tax changes, you're slightly better off. Older people, much worse off. Some people might say that's a decent policy to try and get the economy moving, but as Aaron said, it is somewhat, surprising politically. This is a crazy story, right? So according to The Guardian, socialism, anti-fascism, and anti-abortion have all been put on the prevent list of terrorism warning signs. So the prevent program is the government's attempt to try and stop people becoming violent extremists. And the references to socialism and communism are part of the online training course they recommend to people working in jobs. So if you're a teacher or a youth worker, for example, you can actually all go and see this. I sort of went on the website today and you can take the course if you want to give up half an hour of your life. Now, in a section on left-wing extremism, the course says this: two broad ideologies, socialism and communism, each are united by a set of grievance narratives which underline their cause. Then in a section on single-issue ideologies, the course says this. Remember, this is all on the government website. So narratives are likely to come from those who seek to change a specific policy or practice as opposed to replacing the whole economic, political, or social system. Examples include animal rights, anti-abortion, or anti-fascism. Single-issue narratives can be politically agnostic, meaning they may be neither right nor left. It's almost sort of like basic political philosophy, but on this course, which is, billed as what to watch out for in terms of political extremism. Also very notable in this course, if you go and click on it, it's sort of saying, it is your responsibility to make sure that, whoever is in your care isn't becoming an extremist. So people will be reading this and thinking, I should stay alert. It's my legal obligation to see if someone is becoming a communist. The Guardian say the guidance was updated last year after William Shawcroft published a controversial government-backed review saying Prevent focused too much on the far right and not enough on Islamism. Not everyone is impressed with the changes. Neil Basu is a former police head of counter-terrorism. He told The Guardian that is far too nebulous. So he said of this new information in the courses, and there is no qualification. It might lead to unforeseen consequences, such as overwhelming the system and bringing the system into disrepute. The reputation of Prevent is still very fragile. It makes the haystack unnecessarily bigger, in which you are trying to find the needle. Quite a nice turn of phrase there. Aaron, they're making the haystack bigger, the number of needles presumably somewhat staying the same. What do you make of this? What's going on here?
This is tyranny, Michael. And by the way, William Shawcross is one of those people who he's just given one of these non-jobs to write a report that basically, the government of the day want to hear. So much money is wasted. The commissioner, he's not the commissioner on extremism. There is one of those, by the way, commissioner on extremism. 100 grand a year, just loads of these non-jobs given to friends of the ruling party. This is a gentleman, by the way, who endorsed the war in Iraq, who endorsed the use of torture and waterboarding by the United States. I think those are extreme views. By the way, you're allowed to hold them. It's a democratic society. But I think those are extreme views. And I find it remarkable that somebody who endorses the use of torture is permitted to shape the debate around what cannot be expressed as a legitimate political view. That's what you're basically saying. These aren't legitimate political views. Hence, teachers and whatnot have to be aware of people perhaps having these opinions. Brexit was a quote-unquote single-issue ideology, wanting to leave the EU. I mean, let's take this approach, this methodology, go back 10 years. Somebody advocating for Brexit, would they now be an extremist? Well, that would be most of the people in the Conservative Party. That would be most Conservative Party members. Abortion, I obviously believe in the right to abortion and reproductive rights. But if somebody disagrees with that, because of their religious beliefs, they're entitled to that as a private view. I don't think it should obviously become law. But if that's their private view and that's part of their faith, I mean, I don't know how you legislate against these things, that you make them an extremist. He's now basically saying that a Catholic or a Muslim that doesn't believe in abortion, thinks it's immoral, not that it should be illegal, but thinks it's immoral, that person's now an extremist. And again, to be clear, I think abortion is perfectly permissible. I think it's a very good thing that women have bodily autonomy. But the idea that these are now extremists, I mean, my God, Mike, if you really break it down on the single issue ideology, on communism, socialism, there are many people. Keir Starmer calls himself a socialist, goodness sake. If you remember the Fabian Society, one of the first things, and of course, Rachel Reeves is a member of the Fabian Society. Right at the top, here's what we believe in, socialism. So you're looking at really, probably a majority of people in society would be classified as extremists, according to this methodology, which I think tells you something significant about the extremism of the people running our society. Somebody who thinks it's legitimate to invade a sovereign country under an immoral, illegal pretext, that person is now determining that you and I are extremists. I am worried, but I've been worried for a very long time because people don't believe in dissent, disagreement, or democracy in a meaningful sense. They really believe in them and their friends running things. And if you disagree in a substantial way, then you're a dangerous person and you don't have a right to express yourself, which is why I've always said the left should be defending the right and the freedom of speech, free association, freedom and political conscience, because these people won't do it. They love to talk about it to score some political brownie points. They certainly don't believe in it.
The first part of Jeremy Hunt's budget on Wednesday didn't stand out too much to me. We didn't mention it on the show we did about the budget, but it got lots of people fuming. It was this.
As we mourn the tragic loss of life in Israel and Gaza, the Prime Minister reminded us last week of the need to fight extremism and heal divisions. So I start today by remembering the Muslims who died in 2 world wars in the service of freedom and democracy. We need a memorial to honour them. So following representations from the Right Honourable Member for Bromsgrove and others, I've decided to allocate £1 million towards the cost of building one. Whatever your faith or colour or class, this country will never forget the sacrifices made for our future.
So Hunt referred there to representations from the Right Honourable Member for Bromsgrove. Now, that's the former Chancellor, Sajid Javid, who last month led calls for a Muslim war memorial. Now, the campaign for a memorial was begun in 2015 by the World Wars Muslims Memorial Trust. Before Hunt's budget, they had already received permission to put up a memorial to Muslim soldiers in the National Memoriam Arboretum. That's a word I learned today, an arboretum. So that's a botanical garden for trees. And in this case, it contains memorials for the armed forces, civilian organisations and voluntary bodies who have played a part in serving the country during war. So the group had permission to put up the monument, the memorial, but they didn't have the funding required. They were looking to raise £1 million to build the memorial, for which they already had permission. And that's where the Chancellor stepped in. So he said, I will cough up the £1 million so this can be built. So far, so good, but not for many right-wingers on Twitter. Right-wing blowhard Lawrence Fox said, quote, at last a statue we can desecrate. The baton was picked up by Nigel Farage on GB News.
Over 100 years ago, we had men of more brain and foresight than our Chancellor. They decided at the end of the First World War, and we continued it throughout World War II as well, that everybody, regardless of race, rank or religion, would be buried beneath the same headstone. The principle was equality in death, recognising the contribution of all. And indeed, if you go to a big Commonwealth war grave cemetery in France or elsewhere, what you'll see is a stone of remembrance that says, for those of all faiths and none. We thought about this over 100 years ago. We do not need Jeremy Hunt putting forward the idea of a memorial to a specific religion. It is just plain wrong. I feel very strongly about this.
That was a popular point of view in the GB News studio, and Nigel Farage said he feels very strongly about this. But he clearly hasn't done his research. So for a start, no one is buried at the National Memorial Arboretum. It's a bit of a national park set aside for war memorials, and it already has monuments to lots of different groups. So there is a memorial for Jewish servicemen and women, of course. There's one for Sikhs who served, and one for the Polish people who fought alongside Britain in World War II. And that's among 400 memorials. There is also one for a particular warship's cat. So a cat got a memorial. So Nigel Farage's point is frankly nonsense, right? The idea that Jeremy Hunt has introduced this idea that religions should have their own memorials in this sort of very large national park, they do, right? It's not saying that, we need to chop up the cenotaph. It doesn't seem too outrageous to me. He wasn't the only one who was annoyed. This was Michelle Dewberry's take.
I cannot for the life of me understand who on earth briefed Jeremy Hunt to say, do you know what? I know what we're going to do. Right at the very start of the budget, we're going to, tell people how we're going to change their lives for the better financially. I know what we're going to do. We're going to announce a memorial. I think it's absolutely absurd. And if it is indeed tagged to this notion of quelling extremism, what kind of extremist is going to sit there 1 minute thinking, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to blow up an arena full of kids. Whoa, now weren't. There's a statue. I mean, it's absolutely nonsensical.
So in her defence, Michelle Dewberry was moaning about this being a gimmicky way to start a budget. So that's, not entirely false. I think what Farage said was entirely false. I think what Michelle Dewberry said, wasn't completely unreasonable. But her audience were absolutely fuming.
I was sat watching the budget this afternoon and I was gobsmacked when I saw war memorial for Muslims was going to be, shall we put it, £1 million reserved for them for that? Mm-hmm. When our own war memorials are getting torn down, disrespect is shown to our war memorials. Where does that leave us? I won't hold back because I am furious. I do believe that money should have gone to our war veterans or put some more of our war memorials in place for our people.
Thank you. I just find it such an odd. Can I ask a question? I know. I think she's furious, and I think a lot of people are. I mean, I might not be on to much here, but is there anyone in this room that actually thinks that was the right move, that celebrates that? And I don't want you, because I know there's a big strength of feeling that there's a lot of people that are anti that, but it's perfectly valid to be of the opposite persuasion and think it's a good idea. So can I just ask genuinely, is there anybody that thinks that is a good idea, that welcomes that? I'm trying really hard. Anyone at all? Please don't be shy, because I want... No?
Now, from a cursory glance around the room, it didn't look as if there were any Muslims there, although, I haven't seen Muslims jumping up for joy about this particular announcement. Potentially it is gimmicky, but I don't think it's outrageous. Aaron, you were there in Whitehaven. You were in that room with those people who were fuming about this announcement. Do you think this was all a big misunderstanding? I think people sort of seem to think this would have been the first ever memorial to a religious group who served and would be in the centre of London, not in this national park where there already are loads of memorials to different religious groups and different voluntary groups and et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, we're going to replace Nelson's column with this, this new memorial to Muslim service personnel. I think it's important to say that what Nigel Farage and what Michelle Dewberry was saying were different. I think I agree with her anyway, that it was bizarre to talk about something which is going to cost £1 million at the top of a budget. We are in this country, like a £2.3 trillion economy, sixth largest economy in the world. You're talking about this thing which is going to cost £1 million. It's just kind of weird. Bolting it onto extremism, I think, is also kind of weird. Muslims I know, I saw this on Twitter as well. They're like, well, we don't want this. Like, as if this is the number one ask for British Muslims, which is, many, many people in this country now. I think it's about 8% of the population is Muslim. Significant numbers of people. So, millions, more than 1 million. So I think probably about 1 million plus. So I doubt many of them would say, our number one demand, we're going to have such prominence as a community is to have a war memorial for Muslims. And I also think that, look, there's 2 points of disagreement here. I think most people don't, knock yourself out, build what you want. And the point is it's getting public funding, which is what these people seem to be incensed by. Going on to what Farage said, that's like you say, it's just completely inaccurate. You've got the Chatri Memorial as well, Michael, which is commemorating Hindus and Sikh service personnel. You have a number of memorials which I've seen. I remember seeing one in Gravesend, which was for Sikh service personnel. The Polish thing is separate because, they had their own division or, a cat that dies on a ship or whatever. But we do absolutely have the Jewish one as well. We do absolutely have memorials to certain people of certain faiths. I don't really see the point of that, actually. I think, where you have the tomb for the fallen soldier or the unknown soldier is a trope in many, many cultures. The idea that, hundreds of thousands or millions of people died and this represents all of them, I think is a very powerful motif. But regardless, if people want to build a memorial for Muslim service personnel who died during the First and Second World Wars, knock yourself out. And it is important to say, Michael, against that lady, the final lady, who I think was just making a racist point, frankly. I don't think, necessarily. I think Nigel Farage, I'm sure he does know there are memorials to other religious minorities. I think Michelle's point had nothing to do with race. I actually agree with it. The politics of it, the optics of it, which is very strange. But what that final lady said was just a racist point, I think, at the end, where she's saying, we should have more memorials for us and not for them. In the Second World War, Michael, the Indian Army was hugely important, the war effort. It was the largest volunteer army in human history, and they fought for the British Empire. And of course, many people within that army were Muslim. So I think what that final lady didn't seem to understand is that, yes, there were many Muslims who died fighting for the British Empire in the First and Second World War. Many, many, many Muslims. We often don't think about this. It's certainly not reflected in portrayals of the First and Second World War. In the First World War, I think hundreds of thousands of Vietnamese fought for the French. Of course, at that time, it was a French colony, French Indochina. And of course, there was, not that long ago, Lawrence Fox was commenting, I think, on seeing a Sikh or a Muslim soldier in some film, which was portraying the First World War. And he was saying how ridiculous this was. And people were saying, well, actually, if it was being historically accurate, it would have seen far more than just one chap. So there's a few points being made here. And I think, look, commemorating non-white people who fought for the British Empire is obvious because it's simply what happened. But the idea that you commemorate certain people of one religion or another, I personally, I sort of don't see the point. Michael, if there was World War III, if Uncle Joe Biden took us into World War III against Putin, and you and I both were called up and we were both killed, I would like us to be commemorated by the same memorial, Michael. I wouldn't want one for British Iranians and one for white British people. I think that's actually quite toxic. But regardless, look, if civil society organisations want to do this, good luck to them.
Everyone should be buried in the same place. Your big national memorial should obviously be for everyone who died in the war. But I suppose it seems to me, obviously I hadn't heard of this national, I can't even pronounce the word now. It's not on my autocue, arboretum, something like that. A place with trees. It doesn't seem to me that there's, it's not a graveyard. It is a place where I think you go on like school trips or people go on a day out and then they walk around and they look at all the various different monuments And the whole point of each monument, I assume, is that you sort of think about a different part of the war. Oh, right, this is for the Polish people who fought in the war. This is for that cat that died on a warship. You know, I assume each one has a bit of a different story, and that makes it more interesting to walk around and saying, this is another monument for every single person that died. This is another monument for every single person that died. This is no, I suppose it just breaks it up a little bit. Seems reasonable to me, but probably was a bit gimmicky to start a budget with. Aid agencies have long warned that Israel's bombardment and siege of Gaza risks causing a famine, and 15 children have already died of malnutrition. Thousands more have been left to fend for themselves after their parents and siblings have been killed in airstrikes. CNN have released this shocking and distressing report about the situation on the ground.
Tiny limbs, bones protruding. The constant sound of crying from children now facing starvation in Gaza. In this overrun hospital ward, anxious mothers watch on as doctors provide whatever care they still can. But for some, there is nothing more to be done. 3-year-old Mila, who had been suffering from acute malnutrition, now another victim of this merciless war. She was healthy. There was nothing wrong with her before, Mila's mother says. Then suddenly, everything dropped. She wasn't eating anything. We had no milk, no eggs, nothing. She used to eat eggs every day before the war, but now we have nothing. Across Gaza, too many are feeling the pain of this deepening hunger crisis. Small children, emaciated and malnourished. These were little Yazan's final moments, his tiny fingers gripped in his mother's hand. He, like Mila, would not make it. Others are still just barely holding on, but there is no telling how long they will survive. Standing beside Mila's body, Dr. Ahmed Salem says many children at this hospital are now dying due to a lack of food and oxygen supplies.
It's an absolutely heartbreaking situation, a heartbreaking report. And it's just, I mean, it's unbelievable that this footage is available to everyone right now. You know, that's the kind of, our government is supporting this. The American government is supporting this, an American TV station. Now, you can imagine sort of them supporting something and this being revealed afterwards. Oh, God, how could we possibly have supported this? We didn't know at the time. It's all being revealed in real time what is going on. If you think of what discourse is like in this country, so in the UK right now, people are saying the idea that lots of people want to go on demonstrations about Gaza is some sign of sort of intercommunal extremist conflict, sort of all these people who must be somewhat extremist because they want to protect the Gazans. I mean, we are watching reports where there are children who are starving to death, literally starving to death, because they've been put under siege by an ally of the United Kingdom and the United States. If people weren't out protesting this, I would probably lose all faith in humanity, right? So thank God there are people protesting this, but, you know, it's not enough yet, is it? Right, our government are still supporting those scenes. Now, normally as well, when you could make an argument that sort of no famine is a natural disaster, right? You could say every famine is a result of an unequal world system, for example, and that would be a decent argument. But right, normally when you see footage such as that, where there's a famine going on, you know, it's not obvious how it is the fault of another country, right? It's not obvious that this has been caused by human intentionality. Right, often there's some sort of natural disaster or state failure. It's not that sort of people are proactively enforcing a situation whereby people are starving to death, children are starving to death. But in this situation, that's absolutely what's going on. Israel could end this tomorrow by ending the siege of Gaza. They're not, and we're not doing anything to make them. Let's look at the next part of that report.
With limited aid getting in, many have grown desperate, searching for food wherever they can. 9-year-old Muhammad says he walks for about a mile every day to collect water for his family. You seem sad. Why? This journalist asks him. Because of the war, he says. It is all too much. On Tuesday, UN experts accused Israel of intentionally starving the Palestinian people in Gaza, noting that the Israeli military is now targeting both civilians seeking aid and humanitarian convoys. Israel has denied targeting civilians and says that there is, quote, no limit to the amount of humanitarian aid for civilians in Gaza. But the reality on the ground paints a very different picture. There is no food, no water, no flour, cooking oil or anything, this woman says. Death is better than this. According to a senior UN official, at least a quarter of Gaza's population is now said to be just one step away from famine. With aid agencies facing overwhelming obstacles in getting the bare minimum of supplies into Gaza. And as Israel's ground offensive threatens to push further into the Strip's densely populated south, time is quickly running out.
These are scenes that should shame any country that is enabling the Israel government to do this, right? This should shame the entire West, essentially. We are still backing the nation intentionally carrying out this genocidal war. And this is important. We can't claim we weren't warned. This was Israel's defense minister speaking back in October.
We are putting a complete siege on Gaza. No electricity, no food, no water, no gas. It's all closed. We're fighting animals and are acting accordingly.
So he told us, right? We were told. After now seeing babies literally dying of starvation, those words are just, they were chilling the first time. They're just so much more chilling now, right? Of course, with a genocide case launched against them at the World Court, Israel isn't quite so open about its intentions these days. You don't get, the literal head of the army, someone on the war cabinet, Yoav Gallant is, you don't get them sort of standing up and saying, oh yes, we are not going to let any food in there. We are trying to starve these people because they're a little bit more careful with their intentions. This was a spokesperson for the Israeli Prime Minister speaking to Sky this week.
Do you think that you were doing a good job in making sure enough food is getting into Gaza?
We're doing a better job than any other Western military in the history of urban war.
Do you think you're doing a good enough
Is
job?
the benchmark perfection?
No,
is the benchmark perfection?
It's not starving to death.
But what's the benchmark? I'm asking you.
I do the questions, if you don't mind, and you answer them. And my question is, do you think you are doing a good enough job in stopping kids from starving to death?
If you judge Israel to perfection, the answer is no. Nobody's perfect. But if you take what Israel's doing and you look at what the UK, the US, the international coalition to defeat ISIS has done, if you look at historical wars, Israel's doing a much better job.
So the line that stood out from me there, if you look at historical wars, Israel is doing a much better job. Right? We talked about this before on the show. Sort of one analysis of the contradictions of Zionism is essentially a project from previous centuries in the 20th and 21st century, when sieges, when genocides have become taboo, quite rightly. In the past, you could do that kind of thing and get away with it, right? You could mount a siege against an enemy population and try and starve them into surrender. I was Googling this today, actually, sort of famous sieges from the past. So it's the siege of Stalingrad, which is sort of the most sort of recent example, which is sort of iconic, and I think around 1 million people died, essentially. The Nazis stopped any food going in and out of a huge Soviet city. But now sieges are frowned upon, right? You shouldn't do a siege. You shouldn't block food from getting to a civilian population with the intention of achieving your war aims, which in this case, I think, is sort of pushing them out of a piece of land you want, right? Yes, it might have been acceptable in the 17th century, but we're not in the 17th century. I mean, Aaron, what do you make of this? We keep hearing this, sort of the Israelis saying, yes, this is very bad, but this sort of stuff was quite normal in history. Why are you judging us? Why aren't you judging us against these historical cases? It's really, I mean, especially sort of when we're talking about this in the context of those appalling images from that CNN report, it seems very criminal, right?
Well, it's not just criminal, it's evil. I mean, that woman is evil. I don't think we use that word enough. What's happening is evil. If you're endorsing and supporting it, that's evil. tens of thousands of innocent people have died, 10,000 plus children. There is clearly, we can talk about genocide, there are clearly war crimes, clearly collective punishment, and there is clearly ethnic cleansing going on. And I think the end game is to send many, many people into Egypt and for many more people to die, to basically degrade, quote unquote, the population of Palestinians in the Gaza Strip as part of a broader long-term strategy for Israel. It's evil. That's what we're seeing. And I know obviously the left tries to be analytical, journalists as well, step back, don't use moralizing language. But I don't know how else you'd want to describe this. And also I think people need the sort of intellectual toolkit to make sense of this in normal ways. You know, people, Michael, when they saw the images that came out of Abu Ghraib prison during the Iraq War, the second Iraq War, the second Gulf War, they were radicalized. Many people were radicalized when they saw prisoners in Guantanamo Bay being dehumanized. Many of them, by the way, done absolutely nothing wrong. Wrong place, wrong time, arrested, spent several years in Gitmo. Some have come out and then been able to tell their story. That was radicalizing. Now times that by 1,000. When you see children in those conditions, when you see some of the images we obviously can't share, I mean, I'm sure people have seen them online. People run over by tanks, unarmed people run over by tanks. You know, we were shown that image from Tiananmen Square, that seminal image apparently of uprising, of the man who's so brave he stands in front of a tank and he won't move. And for decades, we've been told that is the face of dissent, resistance, protest. Well, if you do that to an Israeli tank, you'll be run over. You'll be flattened like a pancake. It's an appalling image, by the way, if you get to see that. Appalling. So this is really going to the heart of our sort of received wisdom regarding who we are, because we're endorsing that. What Israel is doing is worse than what the Chinese did in Tiananmen Square. It's worse, significantly worse. We're endorsing it. You know, that was meant to be synonymous with totalitarian evil. What's this? We're allowing them to use RAF air bases in Cyprus. The United States is looking to send a $19 billion package to Israel, about 4 or 5% of Israeli GDP. You know, the equivalent package for this country would be over £100 billion. So what's this? That's the first thing. People are going to get very radicalized by this. Not in the short, medium term, the long term. Millions of people. And Michael, the reason why people, particularly on the right, have called the protests extreme is because they are worried about normal people identifying with them. Because, of course, normal people will identify with them. Normal people don't support war crimes. They don't support ethnic cleansing. They don't support 10,000 plus children dying. They don't support ICUs not being able to operate and newborn children dying within a few minutes of being born. Most people find that disgusting. So, of course, to stop people identifying with the protests trying to stop that, you need to say the people protesting are evil, malevolent. You have to. And then finally, Michael, it's almost like there's an inverse correlation. That the worse it gets in Gaza, the worse we see Israel behaving, the more ridiculous and absurd the slander thrown at those protesting is. And it makes sense in a way, doesn't it? Because if you were supporting Israel after October 7th, not just one day, 2 days, 1 week, 2 weeks, several months, the worse it gets, I suspect quite a few people are going to start to regret their unconditional support for Israel. I mean, Keir Starmer clearly already is. Unconditional support, because of course, that means no conditions. It means, well, whatever they do, I support them. You support this then, do you? And so rather than have to take a step back and say, I was wrong to say that I unconditionally support Israel, you're going to see people to almost assuage their own guilt and to assuage the historical record. Well, I didn't protest because, of course, the people protesting were, you know, all anti-Semites. And I said at the top of my response, this woman's evil, and I think she is evil. Of course she's evil. You have to be evil to talk like that in response to children dying of starvation. Well, if you want to call me anti-Semitic, you go right ahead, because I don't care. I don't care. 99.9% of people out there, psychologically healthy, normal people, don't think kids should be starved to death. They don't think they should be subject to collective punishment. It's not about whether one's anti-Zionist or, you know, pro-Zionist or whatever. It's a disgusting thing to inflict on children. It's being done by Israel. It's being done intentionally as part of a broader strategy. And they have carte blanche signed off by the US, the UK, and much of the rest of the West. And people that have supported Israel so far are complicit. And guess what, Michael? In 10 years, 15 years' time, those exact same people will say, I never was. Because you know why? They will feel disgraced, and they should.
We've got a nice comment here. Well, nice. I mean, I think quite powerful. Picture of telephone. I pray every day for Gaza, and so does my whole church family. Muslims, Jews, and Christians are all children of Abraham. God will judge the perpetrators of these atrocities. Before we finish, some news that broke just before we went live. So Joe Biden will use his State of the Union address tonight, so tonight American time, to announce a port that will be built by the US on the coast of Gaza. So the temporary pier will provide the capacity for hundreds of additional truckloads of assistance each day, a senior US official has said. They added, we are not waiting on the Israelis. This is a moment for American leadership. The White House has said that the operation would not involve boots on the ground, as construction can take place from off the coast. So we'll be covering that more on tomorrow's show. And I will be joined again by Aaron tomorrow. So see you then. Thank you for joining me tonight.
My pleasure, Michael. It was great to talk about a wide range of stories. Not a great way to finish, but at least these stories are getting out to a wide audience. That wasn't always the case in decades past.
And thank you all for tuning in. Do come back tomorrow. You've been watching Novara Media. Good night.